So Star Wars The Last Jedi hits theaters December 15th. Oh, that's just a few short days away on Friday. And analysts are already predicting it's going to make $215 million in its opening weekend. If that's true, it's going to be the second biggest opening of all time. Jurassic World currently sits at number 2 with $208.8 million. And it would be pretty amazing if The Last Jedi could take the top spot.
What movie are you talking about, by the way?
It's the new Star Wars movie. Funkhauser, come on.
I haven't seen it yet. I haven't seen any of them yet, actually.
Yes.
What's this one about? Space or something?
Oh, God. Anyways, The Last Jedi could take the top spot, but it probably won't. That distinction currently belongs to its predecessor, Star Wars The Force Awakens, which had an opening weekend take of $247.9 million in 2015. And you know what? Worth every freaking penny. It was great. It was freaking great, I tell you. Great. Still haven't seen Star Wars, huh, Funkhauser?
No, what was so great about it? Tell me. In one sentence.
If you...
Two moons?
No. In one sentence, it was everything you wanted it to be. How's that? Of course.
All right. No Jar Jar Binks in that one then, though?
No. Me saying no Jar Jar. All right, so yes, we're very excited. We're very excited about the release of the new Star Wars movie, or at least everybody on the face of the planet whose name is not Barry Funkhauser is excited about it. And you know what? Believe it or not, there are people who think there's just not enough Star Wars in the world right now. And for those people, I have this. There's another Star Wars trilogy in the works, in case you didn't know. The first movie will be written and directed by Rian Johnson, the guy who did the upcoming flick The Last Jedi, which is the second movie in the current trilogy. He and his producing partner have released a statement saying Star Wars is the greatest modern mythology, and we feel very lucky to have contributed to it. We can't wait to continue with this new series of films. Apparently, this trilogy won't be part of the Skywalker saga that's being told over the three main trilogies. It's going to have all new characters. Meanwhile, there's a live-action Star Wars series that's going to hit Disney's digital streaming service in 2019. There's no word yet on those details, but we're all very excited.
So it'll be around for the rest of my life then, huh?
Yes. I think the deal is like every year or so. I think it's like every year or so for the next for the foreseeable future. There's going to be something new Star Wars some new Star Wars related thing that hit. I'm really excited, Funkhauser. There's going to be new. Star Wars.
I am too. I guess I have to catch up now. I can do it.
You know, I envy you because you get to watch Star Wars for the first time. That said. If you don't watch it as a wide-eyed child, you instead watch it as a 36-year-old man, it might lose a little bit of
That's
its
why
magic.
I've waited so long. I need to have the right experience, for sure.
I went from feeling jealous of you to feeling sorry for you because you're also a bit of a film buff. You've started working in the film
characters
industry.
and stuff. Like, I understand the story. I just haven't spent time on it. I've seen bits and pieces.
But you're gonna pick holes in the production and the dialogue, and I don't know. I think maybe it might.
There's a time and a place for everything, and that time
it might
is
be
coming.
too late for you, Funkhauser. You might have missed the boat. Your past snark and
don't say it.
Your refusal to watch Star Wars might have ruined it for you.
I challenge you.
That's a you problem, not a me problem. Anyways, because of Star Wars, because we get a new Star Wars movie this coming Friday, I thought we'd take a look back at the time we had genius sound designer, movie sound wizard extraordinaire Scott Hecker on the show. Scott Hecker is a man responsible for what you hear in movies like Batman vs. Superman, 300, How the Grinch Stole Christmas. He was our guest one day, and he is unbelievably notable because his first ever job was working on Empire Strikes Back, providing the sound for an iconic piece of an iconic movie. And without further ado, I guess we should probably get into that, right, Funkhauser?
I remember when he brought in a thumb drive full of sound effects, and I was so giddy to put them in. He's like, "You're not going to play this anywhere else. This is only for the AD show." I go, "Okay, fine."
So cool. Let me ask you this: did you copy that thumb drive of?
Of course not. Why would I ever do something like that?
You gotta respect the authority of a man like Scott Hecker. So without further ado, we take you back to when we had Scott Hecker in studio, and we give you Scott Hecker's Monster.
When we come back.
Where the left and right come together for fundamental truths. AD on the radio, on Twitter at ADSXE.
All right, Funkhauser.
Whoa, what's going on here?
It sounds It sounds like... Oh my God!
That is way too close to the studio.
Was that the Batcopter from Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice taking off?
I do
right by our studio?
Mm-hmm.
How is that even possible? How is that a thing?
Whoa, it's coming back. Look out.
Oh, God! It's truly incredible. You know what? Because we are bored of politics, because we're bored of sniping, and because we're bored of fighting and infighting and all the different versions of fighting that are happening at the moment, we've decided to chuck that all in the trash and do something awesome today. Today, we have been graced with the presence of Oscar-nominated Scott Hecker, who is a sound designer and responsible for all the sounds that you've heard come out of the speakers at the movie theater in movies like Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice, Mad Max, Fury Road, nominated for an Oscar for, what was it, Road to Perdition?
Yes, indeed.
Mm-hmm. And the list goes on and on and on. But Scott Hecker, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Great to be here this morning. Can't wait to get into it.
That's that's amazing. So, I mean, there's a whole backstory that I want to get out of you. But first and foremost, play that again, Funkhauser.
What?
The Batcopter, ding dong.
It flew away. What do you want me to bring it back?
Yes, I do.
Whoa.
I mean, that's incredible. I'll start where I'm most curious. How'd you do that? Like, how did you do that?
We just went out and recorded it.
So, what is that? An actual helicopter? Or
no, not at all.
Okay.
Yeah, it's formerly known as the Batwing, and our code. I had to get out of calling it the code because we weren't allowed to call it what it really is, just to keep things really secret. We knew it as the Sally Jupiter, and but that's just a little behind the scenes. Everything when you're working on these films is sort of code words so that people don't know what you're talking about. But that is a conglomeration of quite a few different sounds. The one thing that we didn't want to use is the typical jet material that you usually hear for, strange spacecraft and things like that. So we actually, the base of that sound is from electric cars. A couple different electric cars. Yes. And we do have, I mean, that's what gives it that really high-pitched whine. And obviously it's highly manipulated and modulated. And some of the weird, wacky sounds at the end after it goes by, like that is made by a bull roarer. It's sort of like a primitive instrument that you swing around your head, and it makes very interesting sounds. And so you're probably thinking like, well, how did you think about using that? And really it's all about playing in the sonic sandbox. It's sonic alchemy, and you just go through your library listening to different things, and you go, wow, that sounds cool, I could use that for X, Y, or Z. Wow. So we processed a lot of the electric car sounds as a base, added bull roar things, and different synth tones from various synth libraries that we have. And we did cheat a little bit. There's a few jet sounds in there when we really needed some extreme power when it came close to camera and ripped by. There's a little infiltration of actually some jet sounds, but we didn't want the base of it to be that. So I think we arrived at something sort of cool. It's different.
But unbelievably cool. So let me ask you this. For that piece of sound, which probably took about, let's say, the better part of a minute, how long did you spend creating that, do you suppose?
Wow. Well, I worked in conjunction on this particular element with Chuck Michael, who was my lead sound designer, worked with me hand in hand through the whole project. And it took over a long period of time, actually, probably over about a 6-week period of time, because you're sort of working on different elements at the same time. And sometimes when you sort of get stuck, you pop over to a different element that you're being challenged with. And so you sort of are juggling a handful of things that you're developing. And we'll send like certain sounds off to the director and the film editor and say, hey, does this tickle your ear? How do you like this sound? And so it's really hard to put an hour number on how many hours it took to develop it. It really is, because it's an evolution almost. We start with basic iterations of it and start adding stuff, different things to spice it up. And then when we finally get a cut of the film to look at, that changes everything, because now the visual images are telling us really what we need to do. And so then we start adding different sweeteners onto the base sounds that we develop to make each of the cuts sound unique and more or less dynamic and dramatic. And that's the fun of the gig, is you can come up with the sound. It's like, okay, you got to come up with the sound of the bat wing without even looking at film. You know it's a flying object, so you know you can start there. But until you get film and see what it looks like and the maneuvers it's making and how it interacts with the camera and whatnot, really dictates the extra sounds and the sweeteners that we end up adding to those. So it's fun.
You've worked on pretty much only the biggest movies over the last 39 years you've been doing this for. We're going to talk about exactly how you started and how this all came to be when we get back. Thank you so much, Scott Hecker, for joining us on the show. Thank you very much. Round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. I guess that I should start by saying that all of this story is true.
It's okay to disagree. It's not okay to be understimulated.
Well, I was just thinking that...
This is KPRC 950.
Don't get the blues, get all the news. We mean all of you guys out there in Radio Land. All aboard!
He's back. AD on the radio.
Give it up, yeah. Give it up, yeah. Bring this on, come on, come on. So if you are just joining us here today, our guest on the show is Scott Hecker. This is a guy who has won all kinds of awards for his work in sound design. He's most recently worked on Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice, Mad Max, Fury Road, Man of Steel, Sucker Punch, the Twilight movies, Watchmen, The Strangers, August Rush, 300. The hack and slash sounds in 300. Was that you?
Absolutely.
It's so cool.
In Technicolor.
Ooh. So, all right, I want to go back to the very beginning. One thing that we often ask, sort of like rock stars, musicians, entertainers on this show, is what was your moment? Like, I'll never forget talking to Jerry Cantrell of Alice in Chains and being like, all right, what was the moment you knew you had to be a musician? What was the record? What was the performance that you went to? What was it? And he was quick as a flash to say, oh, Elton John's Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, which you never would have thought. So I love asking this question because you get some really interesting stories. Scott Hecker, award-winning sound designer that's been doing it forever. First movie you ever worked on was it Empire Strikes Back?
It was one of the first. I was actually an assistant on a movie Ally McGraw and Chris Christopherson film called Convoy, directed by Sam Peckinpah, and that was one of my first. Actually, the first movie I worked on was a really.
Song too?
What's that?
Did that come with that song? We Got a Great Big Convoy. Is that the same movie?
Yeah, they used that song. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I worked on a really cool B film called The Evil with Victor Buono, Richard Crenna, and Joanne Pettit. That was like one of my first films when I was a young 21-year-old being an assistant on that sound job. So.
But my question is, like you were saying before when we were off there, a lot of people don't even know this job exists. And how did you, and I mean, like, you're responsible for so much that affects so many people that, and over a period of years in some of the biggest movies of all time. But at what point did you know what, I want to do sound design?
Interesting you should ask. as a young boy growing up in Ohio, I was always very sound driven. My parents said it at 1.5 years old. I was doing the twist and dancing to music instantly without instruction. So I had the rhythm in me, and I know that's on a musical level. But growing up in Ohio, in our backyard, we had huge ravines, and we used to go down there and build tree forts and just hike around. And it was a huge canopy of forested trees, and I always was marveled at the cool sound of reverb. Everyone likes that sound of reverb. And just noticing how the rustle of the trees and the stream, the babbling brook, and how cool all the bird sounds happened under this like ceiling of trees and leaves. And I don't know, I just was always aware of that kind of stuff. And my major in college, I had a double major, political science, and then mass communication, radio, TV. So I sort of always wanted to keep my toes in that, even if I was going to go into the law thing. I thought, I don't want to do the law thing. And just so happened that my stepdad was in this business out here, and I had a summer break, and I didn't have a job yet. And he goes, hey, we need a driver. You want to come out for the summer and be our driver? I said, sure, I'll make a little money and get to be in California for the summer. Well, I came out and started driving around all the different studios and delivering film in my personal Batmobile. And I started meeting all the people, and over a 3-month period, watching Bob Rutledge, who was my mentor, I was just fascinated, and it had everything and all to do with sound and making cool sounds for films. And so I just said, I don't think I'm going to go back to Ohio. I think I'm going to stay out here. And,
really?
Yeah, no doubt. I had 1/4 of college left. Back then it was in quarters in Ohio. And so I had 3 3/4 years of college at Akron U, and I said, I can always finish off my degree. So Bob said, hey, if you want to stick out here, we can get you going and get you in as an apprentice and start learning. And it just snowballed from apprentice to an assistant. And after a year, I started actually editing cartoon sounds for Hanna-Barbera. We were an independent company, and that was my foray into the sound world. And I thought, wow, it's such a cool start, because in cartoons, you don't really use real sounds. You're
right.
You can use anything, zips, boings, and different swishes, whooshes, bells, and so creatively it was awesome. And then mechanically, it taught me how to synchronize sounds to film, and so I sort of got the basics, cutting my teeth on that. And then I started on the Dukes of Hazzard, the first season of Dukes of Hazzard.
No kidding. So
Absolutely.
wait, hold on. When the General Lee takes a massive jump, obviously they're not sitting there with microphones underneath the car as it does this thing.
No.
You created that sound.
Yes, we actually recorded the hell out of that Charger. We got a full set recording of that and developed all the sounds of the General Lee and all its machinations, and a couple different cop cars that Boss Hogg, he drove around in his Cadillac, and Cooter had his tow truck, and
he did.
And Daisy Duke had her Daisy Dukes.
Right, yeah.
So,
if there was a sound that came along with those, I wasn't aware of it.
just the cloth movement as she walked. We did the Foley movement for her movement, so you can hear her denim jeans.
Really? Hold on. All right. So, I mean, the reason I know what you do exists, I don't know when. I'm sure I've seen other examples of it since then, but and you might even know what this is. I got no idea. I was probably about 5 years old. This is probably like in the mid 80s. And I remember seeing something, I think it was on PBS, explaining how Foley artists work. And it had it was some sort of action type of sequence where a guy was running and they were creating the sound of his feet running. And then there was a fight scene and they were smacking things around to give the sound of punches and kicks. And I was like, wow. So the whole time, live in real time, as that's happening, someone's creating the sound effects. When you go back to creating the sounds for something like the Dukes of Hazzard, were you also doing that stuff as well? Were you sort of
creating sounds as you're watching this stuff happen on film with like physical objects? You mentioned having a bull roarer that you use to create sounds. You have all sorts of different ways and devices and things that you use to create sounds. Were you doing this live as you're watching the Dukes of Hazzard happen?
No, I didn't. I was not a Foley artist. I did have a guest spot as Chewbacca in Empire Strikes Back, but that was that was not my main talent because it is specialized.
Hold on. How were you Chewbacca in Empire Strikes Back? What'd you do?
Well, Bob Rutledge, my mentor, was a fabulous Foley artist, and John Resch, who's an esteemed Foley artist in our community, were the main Foley artists on the film. But they needed a little help on the stage, and so I was there just to help them. And there's a scene in Empire Strikes Back where the characters are walking inside the mouth of a monster. They don't realize it just yet, so had to come up with some very slimy sounds, footsteps. And so Bob said, I'm going to go buy a huge side of beef and bring it in here and pour egg yolk all over it and get it slimy and meaty sounding. And they did their characters, the main characters, and they go, well, why don't you be Chewbacca? Put these muckaluk boots on, these furry boots. Cool. And so they held me on either side because you couldn't stand on the side of beef without sliding off of it with all the egg on it. So I had either of them holding both sides of me, and I got to do a handful of cues for Chewbacca. So it was fun as hell, but I am not a Foley artist. I would love to do it. It looks easy. It's fun. It looks fun. It looks easy. It's like watching Tiger Woods play golf. You go out and buy a set of clubs, go out to the course, and wow, that's really hard.
See, I mean, and I think also maybe you're just used to telling this story, but for the rest of us, we're all going, that scene in Empire Strikes Back where Chewbacca is in the beast but doesn't realize it, and you hear those sounds. That's this guy we're sitting here talking to now, Scott Hecker, walking over a side of beef that's drenched in egg, being held up by a couple people as he wears furry Chewbacca boots. Like, it's amazing. It's amazing that you've been a part of these classic moments of movie history. Like, do you ever stop and go like, wow, that's incredible? Are you too close to it?
I don't think about it much, but I remember, when I was young. I was like 1980. I'd been in the business 2.5 years, so that was huge for me. I mean, after Star Wars blew up, obviously it was a lot of fun, and I was the Foley editor on that film. The Foley artists are the ones that perform and record the sounds, and then a Foley editor actually edits those recorded sounds to synchronize them and make them believable against the picture that you're seeing. So I was credited as a Foley editor on that film, so it was a gas.
Cool. And so then you can see your name in the credits for Star Wars. Look, we talked about this a little bit off the air, but like, you know how the sausage is made. Does that, my first question to you when I found out you worked on Empire Strikes Back is that classic sound, the one that we all tried to make with our mouths when we got our first toy lightsaber, yeah, like, how, my first question to you was, how'd they do that? And you don't know, do you? Like, and you try to avoid pieces of information like that.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I don't. I can't say I personally avoid it, but I don't delve into it and dig into it too much. I sort of, am sort of a fan myself and just sort of like to leave it alone. And I don't ask my colleagues like, well, how'd you do that? And sometimes you do little things, but I have read, and I think it's pretty well publicated, stories about how Ben Burt developed the lightsaber sound, but I've heard different iterations of it, so I'm not exactly 100% sure. And there's some part of that mystery that I like to keep mysterious because I like to watch it and go, wow, that is magical and so cool.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And you still get to do that. You still get to watch Star Wars and go, wow, that was cool. Yeah. And you don't feel too close to it?
No, absolutely, man. I love to watch movies. And when I first started in sound and I was trying to learn about it, I was watching movies more analytically and sort of like thinking like, wow, how'd they do that? And wow, that sounded cool, but that sounded weird. What was that? And now, after all these years, I just love watching movies and sitting back and not break it down and not get too picky about it unless it really takes me out of the film or something. But in general, no, I'm a film going fan and lover. So I love to be amazed. There's a few favorite guys that I know when I walk into a show, and I know that they did the sound on it. I know there's just a handful of guys that just blow me away. So they're inspirational to me.
So cool. What do you think is before I was in radio, I was a guy in a band, so I'm used to tinkering around in studios trying to get things to sound right, and I'm familiar with some of the weird things that people have done to achieve this stuff. And there's a story, and it was an apocryphal story, I thought, until I met the engineer that was responsible for it. But there's a bass drum sound on a Marilyn Manson album that is it's the sound of a bass drum mixed with the sound of a very large marital aid being thwacked against a leather couch, and it was played back to me by the engineer. I was like, you nailed it. That you feel that kick drum in your chest. Good job. That was awesome. What do you think the most unusual thing you've ever done to create? I mean, like spreading egg on beef and walking on it in boots, that's pretty out there. But as far as some of the more unusual things you've done to create sounds in movies that we love, what do you suppose those might be?
Wow. We've recorded so many weird sounds, like in Man of Steel there was so much destruction and whatnot. We found a guy out in Fillmore, California, out past Thousand Oaks, and he had what they called sort of like a cemetery of the cement and stone light poles that the city streetlights were mounted on, and there were like 200 of them, and they all got torn out and piled high out in Fillmore. So he let us come out, and we had a forklift, and we were picking up portions of these things and dropping them on the other portion of the pile of them. And we also got a 4,000-pound K-rail from a freeway construction site and picked that up and dropped that on the other cement light poles. And so you just start trying to come up with different ways to, short of crashing a wrecking ball into a building, which we don't have the opportunity to do.
Never say never.
That would be fun, right?
But we'll talk more with Scott Hecker when we get back and listen to some more of what he's designed.
Real radio. Real radio.
104.1.
Now, more AD on the radio.
So because we are politically fatigued today, we decided instead we would do something awesome. We would talk to award-winning sound designer Scott Hecker, a guy who's worked on movies like Batman vs. Superman, Mad Max Fury Road, Man of Steel, Sucker Punch, The Twilight Saga, Watchmen, The Strangers, August Rush, Empire Strikes Back, if we go back to the beginning of his career, and on and on. Oscar nominated for his work in Road to Perdition. And all right, let's do another sound effect, Funkhauser. And Scott, if you'd be so kind, I'd like for you to set this next one up. Let's do we have the Doom sound effect, Funkhauser?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Doomsday.
All right, so let's set the Doomsday sound effect up a little bit. What were you asked to do in this situation before we listen?
This huge beast that is trying to interfere with Superman's life and ruin mankind and whatnot. It was created by Lex Luthor, so we had to come up with the sounds of this monosyllabic creature. Big roars, beefy roars. He's huge, and the direction was pretty clear. He doesn't speak words, and he is either being aggressive, he's getting hit, or getting stuck, prodded, poked, speared, the whole Megillah. So there you go. And as you can imagine, it's a conglomeration of human voices, various animalistic voices, and with a lot of processing, obviously.
Funkhauser, let's let her rip.
Excuse me.
Oh, amazing. Now, all right, when they give you the brief for that, you know about Doomsday, you know he's this sort of like thing created by Lex Luthor to destroy everything, but do you get a chance to see what he looks like? Do they have like, this is what he's going to look like in the film ready to go, or are you already working on it at that point? Do you maybe refer to the comic books? How does that go?
Basically, we start off with storyboard, just drawings of what it's going to look like, and then some pre-visualization shots that the VFX, visual effects folks come up with. So it's sort of like an evolution for them as well. It's starting from pencil sketches to previs, and then to final visual effects updates in detail and whatnot. So we sort of follow along. The easier part about Doomsday is we just know that the guy doesn't have much of a range. He's a roarer, right?
Right.
So we immediately started on creating very beastie and huge sounds, from attack sounds to being hit himself to dying, pissed off sounds, the whole gamut. And then when you finally get the final visual effects, that's where all the details come in, where you're starting to tweak different elements in different ways. But there's so many different animal sounds in there. And my brother Gary, he's a vocal artist as well as a Foley artist, and he performed some of the more detailed personality types of groans and grumbles as Doomsday is coming out of being born, and he's coming out, just some of the more grumbly sounds and things. Gary did that. But when it comes to the big on roars, it's everything from lions, tigers, bears, walruses, horses. It's the Barnyard Special. So, but the hard part about the hard part about that, though, is when you start stacking different animal sounds on top of one another, sometimes it'll sound like three things at the same time. I don't know if you've gone to a film with a monster in it, and if it's not done well, you can go, wow, I heard like three different animals in there. So the key to it is to really make it believable, so it melds together and morphs. All these different sounds morph together and work together to sound as one, and not like stacked up layered stuff.
Are you going with a long stick and a microphone and poking lions at the zoo to get these sounds? Like, where does a lion sound come from?
Well, we've got great sound effects libraries, but I have recorded lions out in Tahunga, different animals out in Tahunga at the way station, the nature way station out there. We went a number of years ago and recorded monkeys, apes, cougars, lions, tigers, the whole thing. So we've got some really great recordings of all that stuff, and we have fun with it all the time. And if there's something that we need, like then I needed like additional animal sounds when I worked on Hollow Man with Paul Verhoeven. The whole part of the film has to do with different animals that he has in a compound that they do experiments with, trying to make them disappear and whatnot. So we went to dog kennels and recorded dogs and all sorts of different things. But yeah, it's a gas. Sometimes you have to sit there and wait, for an hour for a certain animal to make a certain sound. You have to be patient. We try to stay away from poking and prodding because we like to be nice to the animals. But
I should clarify the situation.
Some people do very nefarious things to various animals to get sounds out of them, but I've not done that. So, and maybe I could get something more juicy if I would do that, but I just haven't. But some guys do.
Well, maybe you can go in with a microphone and a long stick with a steak on the end of it.
There you go. There
you go.
That's something that we did do. A little food action always does the trick,
Wow. And so like, you go and you do these things, and you mentioned you have a library of sounds, but you also go and collect your own sounds with what I'm going to guess extremely large budget films like Batman versus Superman or Mad Max or anything that was part of Twilight. When you have like a budget like that, is there an expectation that, hey, we want you to create all these things from the ground up? You might well have a library of sounds, but some of those might have been used in other movies at some point. We don't want that. Do you ever get a brief where like all this has to be brand new, solely exist within this movie?
No one's actually ever said that, but it's sort of an unsaid expectation. There's certain iconic elements of each film that you just know need to be special and made from scratch. And but sometimes, even though you go out and record, you can go out and record your life away and walk away with not everything you need. And so you've got to layer certain things with other sound effects in the library.
Fantastic. More from Scott Hecker when we return. Thank you so much, dude.
You bet, man. Fun.
Real radio. 104.1. There's something happening here, and you should know what it is. The Dumbing Up of America. Now, more AD on the radio.
So we got a call. Hey, would you like to have award-winning sound designer Scott Hecker on the show? I was like, oh, that's some cool stuff. He's made the sounds that come out of the speakers at movies we all know and love. And I asked Funkhauser, I was just like, would it be too bold? Would it be too audacious? Do I have the unmitigated hubris to ask this guy to bring in some sounds that he's created and go through how he's created them? And lickety-split, it was agreed to, and we are so privileged today to have Scott Hecker on the show playing us some of the sounds that he's created for movies like Batman versus Superman, and the list goes on and on and on. I'm still trying to get over the fact that one of the first movies you worked on was Empire Strikes Back, and that you were the footsteps of Chewbacca whilst in the Beast. Incredible stuff. But we've had the Batwing. We've had Doomsday. We have go through those real quick, Funkhauser. Play the just because it's awesome. Play the Batwing. So bad.
Oh, it's coming back. Ah!
And we've also got the sound of Doomsday. Let's hear Doomsday, Funkhauser, which we learned was an amalgamation of animal sounds and human sounds.
Sounds like us first thing in the morning.
Yeah, that's me before coffee. All right.
Exactly.
All right. And what we have? Do we have one more, Funkhauser, Scott?
Yeah.
Yes, the Batmobile, of course.
All right, set this up, please. I mean, we've saved the best for last here. Let's set up the Batmobile. What was the brief you were given on this one?
Well, first, Christopher Nolan had done the 3 Batman films, and so when I started on Batman vs. Superman, I asked Zach, I said, do we need to be consistent with what was created in the first few with Mr. Nolan? And he said, no, this is a complete reboot of the DC world, and let's do our own thing. And I said, good. I said, I definitely had some different ideas. And actually, we ended up stumbling upon a beautiful mistake, as they call it, on the production to get the car that was the Batmobile. There was actually 2 or 3 of them because they were not totally dependent the way that they had to manipulate it and have it run through its paces. So they had a few for backup. But bottom line, they said, come to Detroit and record this thing. It's got a really cool sound to it. And I was like, well, God, I wonder how cool it could sound. It's got like a V8 engine. Everyone can do that. We've got tons of that in our library and over. But when we heard it, what it was apparently to construct this Batmobile, they had to invert the transmission on it for some reason. And don't ask me why, but structurally, to get this thing to do what they wanted it to do, they inverted the transmission. So when it's moving forward, it sounds like it's in reverse. And it's got this most beautiful reverse whine through all of its maneuvers, and it's modulated by the RPMs of the engine. So the pitch is always rising and falling and doing really wild stuff. So when we sent John Fasal, he's a great field recordist, to record this thing, they wouldn't let us run the car through its paces at all. They said, you can only record our testing maneuvers. As we test this thing and run it through its paces, you can record it. So John took about 3 hours and mic'd this thing up, put microphones on the engine, the tailpipe, and then, of course, since this transmission had such a cool sound, we mic'd that exclusively as well. So we would have separation of those three elements. And so the engine, it wasn't that interesting. Like I said, a V8. But this whine, we had this isolated recording of this whine, which I've never had. And it's pretty hard to drive a regular car around in reverse and record it for very too long. Bad things can happen, right?
Right.
Anyway, we took that sound and manipulated it, and then added various turbine whines for certain elements, and booms and animalistic roars on the extreme dramatic close-up buys, so as it passes by. And so that was sort of like, we just stumbled on that, and we go, that is going to be the sound. The primary sound is that reverse whine that came from the actual production car. So I love it when stuff like that happens. It's just it's so cool.
So Funkhauser, let's take a listen.
There you have it.
Wow! Well done. That's amazing. I never, ever would have I guess you hear a roar and you think, wow, it sounds like a beastly. I never would have thought that you took animal sounds and mixed it in with the sound of a car. Now I know I can hear it, and it's unbelievable, freaking believable.
It's fun.
That's amazing. Do you ever hear? You ever go to the movies and be like, hey, wait a second. That sounds like our Batmobile. Get my lawyer on the phone. Like, have you ever spotted your work in other things and been like, hey, hold on just a cotton pick a minute?
No, I have not. That wouldn't be fun.
No,
I think everyone on a higher level is trying to come up with their own cool stuff. Actually, it was funny because Barry asked, he goes, do you guys swap sound effects between fellow sound supervisors? And I said, back in the day there used to be more of that. It's like, hey, we need a Porsche 911 in my film, and he goes, I just recorded one of those, but I heard you just recorded an Audi 350. So we used to do a lot more of that. Now everyone takes a lot of pride in coming up with their own sounds, and right. Even if your buddy went out and recorded a Porsche 911, you just got to go out and do your own thing, and record,
as one does.
Yes, and record the various maneuvers that are specific to the film that you're working on, rather than working from library sounds that he recorded for the needs of his specific film. So everything's very customized, and you want to build your personal library and have it be very exclusive and unique and all those things. So
yeah, but I'm looking for a 94 Ford Aerostar sound effect.
As it happens, if you go out to my garage, my mobile of choice that a life in radio has afforded me should set you straight, Funkhauser. So let me ask you this. Going back to one of my favorite movies of the last, I don't know how long, 300. You were responsible for the sound on 300, and that includes people getting heads, hands, things like that lopped off, people getting run through with swords, like all the gory violence that came with such convincing sounds you were responsible for the convincing sounds.
Yes. That was a fun film to work on, considering the whole thing was green screen. It was all recorded on sound stages. There was only one shot in that movie that was recorded on an exterior location. That was just like a troop of horses galloping by. But other than that, it was all artificial, but so believable and so cool looking. Zack Snyder is amazing, the look he got on that film. And
it's incredible.
There was a lot of carnage in that film, and it was so much fun, you know? Who doesn't like making bloody, goopy, stabby, violent sounds, you know?
So, like, bloody, goopy, stabby, violent sounds... like someone gets stabbed in the stomach in 300. What is that when, as you start creating it?
It's so many different things. I mean, you bring all these different vegetables and fruits, and on the Foley, a lot of that's really actually made on a Foley stage. You can record it in any quiet environment, but you can get extra messy on a Foley stage because that's what they do. They're always getting messy and splashing around in mud and breaking glass and doing all sorts of crazy things. But yeah, there are recordings as well, besides the Foley element of all the different vegetables and fruits and things like that being stabbed and whacked and beat on. There are recordings of like stabbing, dead pigs and things like that. So you get a little bit. No
kidding.
And stabbing meat, we'd bring in big chunks of beef and stab and do different things like that, and just start stacking sounds together until you get the desired result. It's a lot of fun. Create a whole library of that kind of stuff. And then obviously all the swords and the arrows and whatnot. So, there are great recordings of different archery and arrow sounds, and then take, the swords clanking. But not your average. Most swords that you hear, it's funny, you clank them together and it doesn't sound that impressive. And if you put that real sound up against Leonidas's image, you go, God, what a wuss, man. That sword doesn't sound very interesting, right? So sometimes you're using other things besides swords, metal poles, really solid, heavier things. In film sound, you're always trying to do things that basically you go grab things that are 5 to 10 times bigger than what you're actually trying to articulate sonically, just because film is bigger than life, and audiences expect that. They want everything bigger, bolder, and Zach loves it too. He likes everything big and bold and colorful and flavorful. So that's the fun of working with Zach.
Well, I mean, what I loved about 300 was the fact that, besides the fact that you had you on the edge of your seat the whole time, was just, it was clearly a created world. And I love that it owned that. It looked like real life, and you're but it's bigger. The colors are deeper. The darks are darker. The lights are lighter. Like it's understood the moment you see that this is meant to be bigger than real life. And so I'm going to go back now and watch and know that when somebody gets stabbed through the stomach, it's somebody chopping cabbages. What vegetable was used, do you suppose, in the creation of those sounds? Like, is there a specific one you go to? Like, carrots have a good snap to it. Sounds like somebody's neck breaking. Like, what? You mentioned vegetables, and I must know which vegetables.
Well, everyone knows that the celery, man, that's like the iconic.
Really? No, everyone doesn't know, and that's why this is fascinating. Celery is iconic in what you do?
Yes, breaking bones, celery. Yeah, we don't like to break fellow sound editor bones, so we get heads of
unless
celery.
You've heard your sounds in their movie.
Yeah, exactly. Then it's on. Bring them in here. But that's the go-to for bones breaking, celery and carrots and things like that. But some of the bigger fruit, like watermelons, are great to stab, because it sort of has a resonance to it since it's so big, and you go through the cover of it, and there's sort of the softer, fleshier, juicier insides of that watermelon, and cantaloupes, all sorts of different melons and things like that. So yeah,
Scott Hecker. Scott Hecker, I could talk to you all day about this stuff. It's so fascinating. I've got millions and millions more questions. We're out of time, sadly, but maybe you'll come back. Scott Hecker, our guest on the show today. Where can people tweet you? Are you on Twitter? Is that a thing for you?
I'm not, actually. I'm not on Twitter, believe it or not.
But you are on Google.
If you want to interact with Scott Hecker, too bad. He's got celery to chop. But thank you so much for joining us.
I do work at Formosa Group, and you can get a hold of me there on their website. website, formosagroup.com. Otherwise,
cool.
I've had a great time. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much to Scott. Thank you so much to the Formosa Group. Again, formosagroup.com, and we'll tweet that out. Thank you.
Take your airplane and get out of here.